Hey guys, we're only a few weeks away from an all-new Ratchet Clank game that's actually not all that new. I mean, it's a game based on a movie that's a retelling of the original game. What the hell do you even call this? A reboot? A remake? A reimagining? Repeat? Regurgitation? Nah, I don't know. Whatever the case, it's coming soon and reissue! Is it a reissue? Sorry. Anyway, I'm going to review the whole series leading up to the latest installment. I may not get them all done before it actually comes out, but I'll try my best, gosh darn it, and mark my words, I will get through everything, even if I am a bit late. But for now, let's go back to the days of the original PlayStation, where a small company in Burbank, California were making a name for themselves with a series of cutesy 3D platformers featuring a purple dragon called Spyro. After 3 of these games though, the developers decided they wanted to make something more complex and mature, and the forthcoming PlayStation 2 was the ideal opportunity to do just that. So, breaking ties with publisher Sierra, they started an all-new series based on the premise of letting players blow up a lot of shit. That company was Insomniac Games, and the series was Ratchet Clank. The very first game of the series starts off with a malformed robot being created by an automated machine. The little guy sees something he shouldn't and runs away with his knowledge. During the ensuing chase, he crash lands his ship on the home planet of Ratchet, who's a weird human cat-like thing called a Lombax, and who dreams of escaping his backwater home and exploring the universe. Naming the robot Clank, the two blast off and travel to various worlds in an attempt to stop an insane businessman from destroying the universe. The plot's a little weird, but the game's sense of self-parody makes it seem otherwise. Pretty much everything, from the weapons, to the characters, to the planets, to the plot, is treated with an almost childish sense of humour, and even the plot twist that takes place halfway through the game is handled in a rather light-hearted manner. The tone of the game is one of its major strengths, and does help to paper over how odd some of the characters and their actions are. That said though, the fact that the titular characters have a fine halfway through the game and don't make up until the end wasn't handled brilliantly, and that constant arguing does get old after a while, but it's still only really apparent in cutscenes, and those tend to be brief enough to overlook. Another highlight of the game is how impressive it looked at the time. It doesn't really hold up to modern standards, not even the remastering for the PS3 could do much for it, but when it first came out, the game looked amazing. The lead characters were, and admittedly still are, exceptionally well rendered, especially when it comes to expressing emotion. The bad guys are all very distinct and recognisable, and the different worlds all feel fully lived in. The levels really make use of the power of the PS2, with even the backgrounds in the distance being fully modelled. Coupled with the level layouts, the numerous planets you visit all feel exceptionally well designed, and there's no shortage of things to destroy as you make your way through them all. This leads nicely to the best part of the game, the huge variety of weapons. You start with a wrench to use as a melee attack, and a glove that can throw bombs, but before long you're able to buy a decoy device, a rocket launcher with projectiles you can actually pilot, a Morpho Ray that turns enemies into chickens, and the cunningly acronymic Rhino. While several of these weapons have since been copied in other games, and pretty much all of them have been outclassed by later games in the series, they still remain great fun to use here. The majority of the game consists of running around and blowing up anything that moves. There's a good helping of platforming action here and there, as both Ratchet and Clank, and there's some additional side quests in the form of hoverboard races and ship-to-ship battles, none of which are all that deep and interesting, but do provide a mild distraction from running around and avoiding enemy projectiles and filling all the bad guys full of so much lead they blow up in a shower of bolts, which you collect with a satisfying metallic jangling sound that's way more iconic than a bloody hat, Ubisoft. Unfortunately, while the core gameplay works well, it isn't as refined as you'd think it would be, and it pales in comparison to the subsequent games in the franchise, which is incredibly unfair, but sadly unavoidable. You'll spend most of your time controlling Ratchet, and compared to other 3D platformers, he feels pretty stiff. His movement speed is fairly slow, and while he has a wide range of skills, they all feel a little awkward to pull off, which means that the platforming aspect of the game could be more of a challenge than it should be. In combat, the core of the game, there are problems as well. The lock-on system has trouble staying locked onto enemies while you're moving, meaning you'll constantly have to stop and aim at an enemy, which can be frustrating in the middle of a firefight and often means you'll be unable to avoid taking damage. And since the camera can have trouble keeping up with you, occasionally you'll find yourself having to shoot at enemies you can't see. There are other sections of the game, such as the swimming or wall jumping areas, where the developer's inexperience with a two-legged main character really does show. These sections slow the game's pace down to a crawl, and as you can't really defend yourself while engaging in such activities, players will undoubtedly find themselves dying several times until they figure out how to compensate for these problems. Anyone who's swum through the sewers of Blackwater City knows exactly what I'm referring to here. On the other hand, the game was one of the first major titles in years to use a New Game Plus system, which has become such a staple of the franchise it's unusual when an entry doesn't have it. Letting people restart the game while keeping all the weapons and money they'd collected the first time round wasn't just a great way to encourage repeat playthroughs, but it means players are given a helping hand in tracking down all the hidden bonuses that are squirreled away. Again though, it's nowhere near as advanced as its sequels, which does limit its effectiveness somewhat, but even so, it's handy for finding all those hidden collectibles or unlocking skill points, which were essentially a precursor to modern day achievements and trophies. So while this function may not be as developed as its follow-ups, there is still plenty of content for players to find if they're willing to put in the effort. As the first game in this series has been going on for over 10 years now, it's easy to look back at the original Ratchet & Clank and criticise it for not having the same features that its sequels do, like strafing or weapon upgrading. But the truth of the matter is that these features are important. The game simply feels wrong without them, and even if it were an entirely separate game with no connection to the franchise, it would still feel clunky and awkward. Simply put, it hasn't aged well at all, no matter what die-hard fans will say. It's one of the main reasons I'm so looking forward to the remake/reboot/whatever. Being able to replay the original game with all of the improvements introduced in the sequels is something plenty of other franchises could stand to do rather than just re-releasing random games with zero context. I'm looking at you, God of War. If you've ever played any of the other games in the Ratchet Clank series, this will seem like a massive step back. Everything it does is done better by its sequels. As such, it's hard to recommend to anyone but hardcore fans of the series who want to see how it all started. And if you really do want to see how it all plays out, well, buy the remake. Even if it's not all that great, it's probably still going to be better than this.